Hey everybody, welcome once again to the Wrestling Inc. podcast. I'm Glenn Rubenstein and joined today by a special guest, Gino Vega. How's it going, man? How you doing?
Doing well. Glad to be here today.
Cool. Thanks for stopping by the podcast. Today we're going to talk about SmackDown Live for October 18th, 2016. So to start with, sort of your big picture thoughts, what did you think of the show last night?
Well, coming off the heels, especially of watching Raw on Monday, wasn't my favorite show. I thought that I was still kind of taken with the whole Goldberg angle on Monday. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of high expectations to live up to because I really enjoyed that end of that show. But, I mean, I thought it was a show. I'm kind of waiting to see where SmackDown's going right now. I feel like things are kind of not stagnating necessarily, but, I'm waiting to see. I'm kind of waiting for some new direction on the show, basically.
It does seem now in this new era, since we've had the brand split established, I know my thought has been that I think SmackDown has been consistently a tighter show, obviously with the shorter running time. I think they've had a more coherent idea of what they were doing storyline wise. But to your point, I do feel like, especially with No Mercy, that was really sort of this catalyst for me where it's like, okay, we've been, running in place with a lot of these same storylines now for 2 months coming up, on I forget what week's episode this was, but it feels like we're not getting a lot of forward movement in new directions. And
Right.
Maybe the shallowness of the roster is really starting to be felt.
Yeah. I think that's kind of what was standing out to me since No Mercy, like you say. When the brand split started, SmackDown really did feel to me like like you were saying, the tighter show, the more coherent show. It usually feels like more of a show while watching it, where Raw is kind of all over the place a lot of the times. But I feel like now that we're some months into this process, the thinness of the roster is kind of starting to show some signs of wear.
Well, let's go match by match and talk about what happened on the show. Of course, the big result last night, and in their internet wrestling community, especially, I mean, I think just a gift to them with James Ellsworth and continuing what he's got going on, and literally in the main event title picture last night of all things. But let's go match by match and talk about what happened. We had, the segment starting with Ellsworth and Dean Ambrose backstage, of course, pushing the new Ellsworth shirt, which, it is what it is. But the first match and extended segment of the night was Randy Orton versus Luke Harper. So let me ask you this. I know Raj and I in recent weeks have sort of talked about our apathy towards this storyline, but what do you think about it and where it's headed? And I mean, this was the first time we've seen a casket in WWE programming in a while, so I'll give him points for that. But with the whole switcheroo and Kane appearing at the end, I mean, what do you think of the storyline, and how did you think it was presented last night?
I think apathy is a good word for this storyline. I think that, I mean, we're just seeing kind of the end results of, I guess, years now of what, from my opinion, is kind of a mishandling of the Bray character. This whole feud in particular, to me, it just feels like a lot of square pegs trying to be fit into round holes. I mean, Randy Orton is probably the last guy on the WWE roster that I think of putting in a supernatural angle. That isn't really working for me. And Bray, I mean, I feel like since the Wyatt family came onto television, they've always been trying to push this supernatural angle with them as well. And it works somewhat with the character, but I think he's a significantly different character than The Undertaker was. And I feel like there's kind of this move to make him, the heir to The Undertaker's position as, the spooky supernatural guy on the roster. And I mean, that is definitely a place for him there, but I think it needs to be in a different way than The Undertaker. Like, I don't know, caskets and Bray don't necessarily work for me. I mean, I don't see the connection there. So, this particular feud, I haven't been having a great time watching it unfold.
What's that quote? And I'm not sure who even to attribute it to, but you see it come up, especially on Reddit a lot, where Vince thinks with Bray he's created another Undertaker, but in reality it's another Papa Shango.
And the sad thing is, I mean, that Bray could be a lot more than Papa Shango, and but yeah, that quote pretty much sums up, how it's felt to me so far.
Well, and that's the thing, we've talked before that, they've never really done a full face turn with Bray, that maybe, of course, it's time. With Randy, last night, and this is a big pet peeve for me, is I feel like when the commentary team or the wrestlers themselves start quoting the entrance music, they've got nothing else.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And with Randy, it's just like he hears voices, Morrow. It's like just when JBL is sitting there, going off his talking points. I thought the Kane switcheroo was kind of neat. It kind of, I like when they do sort of gimmicks and stunts like that. Although with the Wyatts and with Kane, it seems like that's sort of their go-to. It's like, hey, you might not know this, but we can sneak guys in under the ring and then have them appear and then disappear back under the ring.
Yeah. And I mean, in WWE, I definitely think there's a place for that. I mean, some people get bothered by the supernatural, magical stuff in general. I mean, that's always been around in WWE since the days of WWF. So that part is fine. It's just, I feel like it's not really going anywhere.
Yeah, and I don't know what the resolution is of this. So Randy Orton won by DQ after Kane got involved, and hijinks ensued. I have to say, I really like the backstage segment they followed up with after that, with Andrea DeMarco with AJ Styles. And him just going on about, the match with James Ellsworth. I love that he did the shout out to David Arquette as the WCW champion.
Yeah, and that was funny because that's what I've been thinking about the whole time since this James Ellsworth storyline started. It's been kind of shades of David Arquette to me.
Yeah.
It's been making me think back on that. Probably also the fact that Goldberg's back and now it's,
yeah, it's like it's 99.
WCW, and flooding back, which is fine with me because I was a big WCW fan. But yeah, that segment, again, it speaks to, from my opinion, I mean, AJ Styles has just been amazing in WWE as far as I'm concerned. I've been an AJ fan for a long time. But if you had told me, 5 years ago that he would be able to be in this, really top of the card main event spot in WWE, I don't think I would have seen it quite like how he's been able to pull it off. I mean, he really, he's always had the in-ring work. And when he was in Japan, more of the character started to come out that he's portraying now. But I mean, he really, any segment they've given him in WWE, he's really been able to run with and turn it into something, in my opinion. So
this is being mentioned in the chat on YouTube Live. Do you feel like they're sort of hampering him and making him look bad as champion, doing stuff like Ellsworth, putting him in sort of a stunt comedy match like that, or using Ellsworth as a proxy for his feud with Dean Ambrose? But furthermore, in that leaning so hard on AJ being this over the top heel, do you feel like they're sort of limiting what they could do with him as champion?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was trying to say was I think he does a good job with what they give him. Yeah. But I'm not necessarily a fan of what they've been giving him. And I think he could do a lot more. I mean, I think he's been at his best kind of with some of the early Cena matches that he had when he's just really put in there as this serious guy in the main event title picture. For me, I mean, I think comedy stuff like the James Ellsworth stuff, which I know like a lot of my friends that have been really into it, I don't have a problem with it, but I really don't like to necessarily see it in the title picture. I think that's like, you want to keep that main event title situation. That, that's kind of where the substance of the show is. That's where the serious stuff is, and have all the, the comedy and stuff further down the card. So yeah, I definitely think it's, I don't think it's necessarily making him look bad because he's able to rise to the occasion and make something out of it, but it's not necessarily where I want to see him, as an AJ fan.
Well, and because they have the legit OG WWE World Championship on SmackDown. Especially.
Yeah, and that's if you really stop to think about it, that's kind of funny too, because it really seems like this is not, this is like a kind of a secondary world title and the main world title's on the other show, which isn't the case.
So after that segment with AJ, we had Alexa Bliss versus Naomi. I mean, what do you make of this? Now, I've been lamenting, and for me, it was especially disappointing having been at No Mercy Live and being at SmackDown that week with Becky Lynch being out of the picture till November 8th. What do you make of sort of this placeholder feud they have right now with Alexa and Naomi? And what did you think of the match last night?
It's very day glow. No, I don't. I mean, again, this is stuff that now some months into the brand split. I can't remember exactly when it started, but we're starting to see some of these cracks, which a lot of people were worried were going to happen because they happened the last time this company did a brand split. It really doesn't make any sense to me why they don't have, all the tag teams on one brand, all the women on one brand. Things seem so diluted right now. And you'll have with the women on each show, you have your kind of main feud, and then everything else. There's a few kind of secondary feuds going on, placeholder feuds, and everything just feels really diluted to me. It's like, I don't know. I really wish that things were kind of focused, like, because I think at its best with the brand split, you can end up with two shows that are very distinct and you really want to watch and follow each of them. At the worst, you end up with and how I feel things are kind of going right now. Raw's a red version of a show, SmackDown's a blue version of the show, but it's basically the same show. And I feel that's kind of what's happening right now. I see a match on Monday night. I remember they were doing this when they were kind of when the brand split was first starting off. They were reintroducing the idea of squash matches, which I think is a great idea. But you were seeing what was it? Braun Strowman doing a squash match on Monday.
Yeah.
And then you were seeing Nia Jax do a squash match on Tuesday, and it was basically the same character, same match, just different actors in the role. And I really seeing the parts of the roster where they don't have as many members, such as the women, such as the tag team. I just really think that they would be better served being on one show.
Well, and I'll tell you, so with Alexa last night, I like that she went back to doing, not OG Alexa, but doing something that was a little more recent with her NXT look, doing the Nightmare on Elm Street homage. Which is good. I think that Harley Quinn thing, man. I mean, like, I get that someone in costuming feels like a genius for having, come up with that comparison. And I'm sure creative liked it, but man, Morrow just lampshaded it so hard.
Yeah. That doesn't, it's funny because a lot of times I feel like, in WWE and in wrestling, when there's a gimmick or an act that's just so closely drawn from something that's already in popular culture, a lot of times it doesn't work for me. But then when I stopped to think about it, I thought the Sting Crow character was one of the greatest characters in 90s wrestling, and that was just a direct ripoff of something from a movie. So there's a fine line. But yeah, the Harley Quinn thing, I like her better, doing the NXT gimmick. That to me, I was much more interested in and invested in Alexa Bliss as she was on NXT than from what I'm seeing right now. So.
And she had a good storyline on NXT with a good evolution of the character.
Yeah, definitely.
Face to heel. And I feel like, do you watch Talking Smack on the network also?
I don't usually catch that. Yeah.
She did a good, in-character interview on there. And what was disappointing to me is Daniel Bryan really set her up to, sort of give her story as, a pageant and gymnastics kid, someone who maybe had, like an overbearing parents who put them into it. And they started to set up the backstory, and I'm bummed that they didn't really carry it through. Possibly because she doesn't have Becky as a partner to play off of. But I can't wait for Becky to get back. I like Naomi a lot. And I think Naomi is one of those examples, when we talk about in the history of wrestling of people that, have taken, just a very thin gimmick and made the most of it. I think Naomi with her entrance, just ever since she debuted that, I feel like the audience cares all of a sudden.
Right, yeah.
She was off the radar before, but she just doesn't, there's nothing on the mic. There's no story there. So we're just getting these matches.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I think, and I think that's why sometimes there seems a disconnect between what we see if you follow some of these characters in NXT then versus how they appear once they're called up. Like you're saying with like the gymnastics backstory, there's so many missed opportunities. It feels like just these little things that give you an investment in the character. And it's not even like the most outlandish story in the world. It's just these things that make these characters real to you. And I just feel like on Raw and SmackDown, there's not a lot of backstory given when these characters are presented for the first time.
Well, and the weird part is, speaking of what we talked about with the David Arquette mention, and even the Spirit Squad, which we'll talk about in a minute, SmackDown is not afraid of continuity. They're not afraid of referencing, just random things that happened, and even going a little deep in that, like we saw with some of the promos The Miz was cutting against Dolph.
Right.
And so that's where it's strange to me that they're not drawing on this. I guess maybe their assumption is maybe the awareness of NXT isn't quite as high. But I don't know about you. Since the brand split, I mean, I never thought I would say this, but it's like NXT has now been kind of fallen back to where it's like I'll catch up and just kind of go through a couple weeks at a time because everyone I loved on NXT is on the roster now.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't watch the NXT weekly show live or regularly anymore. I mean, it's not due to lack of interest or there's just so much other content out there. And I mean, I of course follow the NXT the Takeover specials, but I mean, I just feel like I can get what I need out of that show now by watching those. So.
And I really compared it a couple weeks ago. I mean, I feel like NXT now feels like 81 or 86 or 94 on SNL. Like it's very much a rebuilding year where they've got some name talent, and then they've got a lot of people that are very rough that I will care about them at some point, but not quite yet.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that I don't really care about, Apollo Crews versus Curt Hawkins.
Curt
Hawkins, not a match per se. What do you make of this and how this has all gone with the sort of botched reintroduction of Curt Hawkins to the WWE universe?
Well, again, with the idea of sometimes some of these ideas kind of being recycled in a way where it feels like we're watching the same thing. I feel like the Curt Hawkins introduction and the lack of matches, it almost seems like we're hearkening back to Eva Marie, who is no longer with us, or at least for now. But with the lack of genuine heat behind the angle and interest, just instead of Eva Marie, who people were genuinely invested in booing, coming out and not giving us a match, we have let's throw Curt Hawkins out here, which is, I don't know, the whole Curt Hawkins thing is strange to me because I pretty much associate him with being kind of barely on the roster maybe 10 years ago. I can't remember. Maybe it has been that long, but
around 2010.
Yeah. 6 years ago. But I don't know, that whole thing to me, not really feeling the Curt Hawkins angle. Not really feeling what they've done with Apollo Crews at all. And he's another one that when he was on NXT, they gave you a pretty substantive backstory to sink your teeth into. There's a whole idea of, his family background and his dad being dubious about his wrestling aspirations. And I mean, it's not a huge storyline that's going to require, weeks or months to roll out, but just something so this guy's something other than just kind of an athletic dude that can flip around. I mean, we haven't really, I don't know what we're supposed to make of Apollo Crews on the SmackDown roster, and which is kind of disappointing to me because I mean, I've seen what he's capable of doing. I watched him in Japan, and I just don't think that they're really getting what they could be getting out of him. So.
Well, and that was certainly a problem even on NXT. They did try and expand his backstory, but I think that the idea was, he's an incredibly gifted athlete with a great smile and very charming, very upbeat and positive, but that's about it. And they didn't even take that and run with it. It seemed like in NXT, the joke was, it's like, okay, well, maybe he'll be kind of like a male version of Bailey, be like very generous and nice and magnanimous, and then still like whoop your ass in the ring. Right. But I just feel like they've never really developed that. And with Curt Hawkins, I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's very strange to me that this has gone on for so long. Like this should have been over and done with. I mean, so quickly. I can't even wrap my mind around what they're going for with this, except it's just like they can slot this in literally to fill time. It's like,
exactly. And that's what it feels like while watching it.
Which
is unfortunate too, because on SmackDown, with it being a tighter show, a 2-hour show, you don't need those fillers. Really. So
let's talk about a segment that I thought was really surprisingly good. I mean, I thought one of the high points of the night that they let Carmella back on the mic last night for an extended promo with Nikki Bella. Thankfully, Carmella did not do her new intro spiel, which is funny because I dug her intro spiel in NXT. I thought she was a great sort of extension of the Enzo and Cass franchise brand. And then they brought her to SmackDown, gave her that revamped intro that just sucked. And then they were like, we need to take the mic away from her. But last night with Nikki, I thought that was really, really just interesting, the angle they went with it, and in acknowledging in kayfabe Nikki's relationship with John Cena. Because, I mean, obviously it's no secret, Total Divas, Total Bellas, but really incorporating that front and center into a storyline. Now, granted, it did feel like an extended promo for Total Bellas, but I felt like, okay, at least they're going somewhere with this, as opposed to just Carmella is just this crazy woman who just runs out and attacks Nikki Bella all the time.
No, I felt the same way. And when I was watching it, I was realizing, I was kind of transposing in my mind that they'd gone here before with the Cena Nikki Bella connection, but I realized they really haven't storyline wise. I think I'm kind of more thinking back to the Daniel Bryan Bree stuff that they were doing for a while. But yeah, I think it definitely gave more substance to something that I probably wouldn't have really cared about much otherwise. So
Yeah, and I think they need to figure out where it's all headed. So on Talking Smack, Daniel Bryan about a month ago, I guess, ad-libbed something, which as they are wont to do on that show, about this idea of Carmella and Nikki in a no DQ match, and of course, it didn't end up happening at No Mercy. But I think that's the thing, is I think they're just going to have to build this up to sort of one big end-all be-all match, do something a little different for a women's match, because with Carmella, that's the one thing that I will say I like about this, is that doing something so aggressive for a female on the roster, even more so, I think, just because of the unexpectedness. I mean, I think this is even beyond what Dana Brooke has been doing, and just having these out of nowhere attacks. And I would like to see it sort of build up to something like that, do something a little different, and see what they can do, see what they can pull off.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this, which I thought was very interesting, given that, so last week it just sort of developed where we have the Miz now flanked by the Spirit Squad, which,
right.
If they're going to continue this, coordinate the outfits. That's all I ask.
Yeah.
Get the Miz in green or something.
Yeah. The thing that makes me sad about this, about the Spirit Squad coming back, is if they're willing to bring back the Spirit Squad, I really wish we could have seen a return of the Mean Street Posse back at WrestleMania, when Shane came back, but I digress.
Well, we've had the Headbangers on, for Christ's sake. I was talking this, our co-host on Monday nights, is Matt Morgan. And I was telling him, man, I was like, it's, I finally had to put it to him where I was like, if you thought about going back, because if the Spirit Squad and the Headbangers are coming back, man, I think Matt Morgan would be over at this point, I mean, if we're going for references.
I'd be all for a Matt Morgan return. So.
Absolutely. But so I thought this was interesting. I like what they did. Heath and Rhino giving them that short little mic segment last night with the video package coming in, I thought was good. I feel like they've, putting the belts on them was really the end of that storyline, which was so nicely organically developed through the brand split, everything they did with Heath, and then just lost in the shuffle once they got the belts, because the real story is the Usos and American Alpha. But just even giving them that little bit, of Rhino, the perfectly timed "I just hate male cheerleaders" quip was great. I love what Dolph's doing with the intro now with the belt. But it's kind of the same thing with Dolph, though, right? It's almost, I feel like the WWE has just acknowledged that we know how to tell a really good storyline that will get you someone invested in the journey. But once we're at the destination, we just have no clue anymore.
Yeah. That tends to be the case, it seems like.
So what did you think of the tag match of doing the 3-on-3?
I liked it. I always like stuff like you were saying earlier about SmackDown not being afraid of continuity, because I think sometimes just overall as a company, WWE is a little too afraid of continuity. And so I like when they bring back these nods to the past in effective ways, such as the Spirit Squad. The Spirit Squad is kind of strange for me because they were around originally kind of during my weakest time period of wrestling fandom. Like I wasn't really watching that closely. I mean, I've been a wrestling fan since '86, and I think that was like my whichever year Spirit Squad was around, that's when I was watching the least. So I don't have quite the nostalgia pop that I sometimes will for these kind of acts. But I do like that they brought them back. It did add something to the Dolph story, the Dolph Miz feud, which has been surprisingly more substantive and better than I thought it would be originally. But yeah, I thought it was a good 6-man match. I do agree with you about the Heath Slater and Rhino team. It's just like, where do they go now?
Yeah.
But we'll see. I mean, that was hard because that really was the buildup for that team. To give WWE props, that was one of the better things I've seen them pull off in recent memory as far as a long-term build, long-term storyline. The Heath thing, I originally thought they'd drop it after a couple weeks, but they stuck with it and had a great payoff at the end. But now, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'd like to think that was planned, but I really feel like that was just a serendipitous moment that they sort of stumbled into it with the joke of him not being drafted, and then realized, oh my God, he's now more over than he's ever been, and the audience is really invested in what happens to this guy.
Yeah, and I think that's why it worked so well, because it was, like you say, it was a serendipitous moment. They let it kind of breathe, and they let it, live out its lifespan, which isn't always the case. So
yeah, and at SummerSlam, I mean, the chance for Heath, who was not booked that weekend, on anything, I mean, just I think really proved that they had something there to take the ball and run with it. So we followed that up. We had, sort of this more build up to Survivor Series, which is strange to me that in universe, in storyline, they're making such a big deal about accepting the challenge and all this stuff. I mean, if you're going to have a cross-brand pay-per-view, I think it's expected that there's going to be a Raw versus SmackDown angle there. So I really, credit to them for really trying to play out, all this motivation. To me, it reminds me of like, when I'm trying to convince my wife of something, like we should really go to this concert or should really go to this event. I come up with like all these reasons. And then when I just first hit her with it, she's like, yeah, okay. And I'm like, oh, but I had this whole thing planned out to sort of explain it, to sort of convince you. So I'm just going to run through that anyhow. So yeah, it's just such a given. I don't feel that they have to lay the groundwork here. But I did like what with Natalia. I mean, it was so sort of stupid, and probably half the younger audience just didn't get it. But the Whitney Houston quotes thing, I mean, it was just Natalia. It's like, to me, that was one of those things where it's like, I bet you they assume half the people aren't even paying attention to this, and it immediately caught mine. I just like when they do sort of off the wall pop culture references like that.
Right.
And the stuff with their cat on Instagram. I mean, with that, look, this to me suits Natalia better than trying to make her this monster heel that they've been invested in trying to do now for almost the last 6 months.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was cute, and it worked. But speaking of things that I think didn't really work so well, Jack Swagger versus Baron Corbin. Like someone that I've never cared about versus someone that I've tried to care about. I mean, with Corbin, I feel that he's gotten better. He was on Talking Smack last night. It was a 100% improvement on what he did his first time on Talking Smack, where sort of giving an interview in character and, improvising a little bit. I think he's got a better handle on it, but it's just, man, of all the people to bring over to have be the first, cross-brand defection from Raw to SmackDown, just with Jack Swagger, I think the We the People thing is over, but it's only over because people like audience participation.
Yeah. It's not character dependent or a reflection on him, really. I mean, Jack Swagger, that he's been around for so long now, and there's been so many stops and starts with him. I mean, he's kind of there, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, he's, and it's weird too, because he's not really at the enhancement talent level, but
but he's not,
yeah,
anywhere above that. Really, he's in this kind of strange no man's land. And it's sad with him because he was someone that, on paper had a lot of potential. I mean, his size, his kind of amateur pedigree, he was always, Jim Ross always cites him. I think he was Jim Ross's last signing as the talent relations for WWE, and it just really never took off.
Yeah, and he's got a good look, good name with Jack Swagger, but just I feel like I don't know what the gimmick is right now. It feels like they're on this Patriot thing, this Real American thing is on its last legs.
Yeah, it is, and I think he's best served being kind of a big monster legit guy, with his amateur wrestling. I think he's at his best kind of monster heel with a manager. And that's just not really a role that they've given him much over the course of the time that he's been there. Corbin, on the other hand, it's like I've never been a huge Corbin fan, but I see flashes where he seems to be kind of a grumpy guy. And when he can kind of channel that sort of just surly, sullen personality, it kind of gives you something to sink your teeth into, some legit dislike for this guy. But I haven't seen it in any kind of consistent fashion or in a feud that I've really been able to care about yet. So I'm still kind of on the fence with him.
I liked in NXT when he was doing the indie killer thing.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah. And that worked for me because as someone that, watches indies and likes indie wrestling, it's like, he's insulting my guys, what's going on here? I thought that worked really well, but I don't know how really to translate that onto the main roster, you know.
They almost could have, now that I think about it, given where with the Miz and Daniel Bryan and then the heat they had after talking smack 6 weeks ago. I'm surprised they didn't like make Corbin almost like his muscle or his lackey, and kind of go with that gimmick of just sort of taking out the former indie guys that are on SmackDown. Because I think for people like yourself and myself that are aware of that sort of larger universe that these guys come from, I think there could have been something really cool there.
Yeah.
But yeah, as it is, I don't know. I just something, because it's like for me that's becoming the bathroom break match.
Yeah, it was a match.
Yeah, so Corbin won. This is probably leading up to an awesome pre-show match on the next SmackDown pay-per-view. So we went from that to the WWE World Title match, James Ellsworth versus AJ Styles. And okay, so with Ellsworth, internet wrestling community loves this guy. I think the mainstream fans get it too. I mean, being at SmackDown Live last week, I thought, we talked about last week how it played on the air with the match with Ambrose Ellsworth, with Ambrose being the ref. Ellsworth versus Styles. Live, it played like theater. I mean, this was like throwback comedy to the true vaudevillian era. And it seemed to me like furthering this, obviously Ellsworth versus Styles probably don't have that much of a legit match in them, should that would really work all that well. And I'm sure the WWE has some reluctance to work with a guy that's not signed for sort of an extended match with a lot of spots. So I think Ambrose being in it is the only way to do it. And like I mentioned earlier, Ellsworth has become this proxy through which now the Ambrose Styles feud is being continued. But what did you make of it? I mean, do you feel like they sort of got this out of their system? They gave it the pop last night. Now it's done. Do you think they're going to continue this and really run it into the ground?
I would have liked last night to have been it with this, as far as it being something that's wrapped up in the title picture. But I don't know, with the DQ win, I mean, it's still open for, the feud must continue. So I don't know. I mean, I don't see how much more legs this has, but that certainly wasn't a decisive end to it. So I feel like they're going to keep going with it in some fashion. And again, this is where we're starting to get into roster issues, because I think AJ's been great on top on SmackDown, but who else is there for him to feud with? I mean, he's, him and Cena are great together, but they've done that. They're still doing him and Ambrose, and I mean that can keep going on for a while. But I mean, it's gotten to the point. Part of why we're seeing a proxy come in is because they have to do something to mix it up, so it's not just the same 2 guys or 3 guys feuding month after month after month. And I just don't see who else is really there to come up into that main picture.
I mean, Randy, I think, as opposed to being with Bray, I think Randy and Styles could do a good. That would be a month's worth of programming.
Yeah, and it could, but I mean, Randy is kind of. Getting long in the tooth for title pictures in the WWE. I mean, I think where, someone like Cena that's been around for the same length of time, he's managed to kind of continuously reinvent himself over the years, to the point now where he's even, 5 years ago, I was in that stereotypical, I was the Cena sucks component of the let's go Cena sucks. So back for Cena at this point, for me, and I never thought I'd be saying this, is one of my favorite guys on the roster, because it's just like kind of at this point where it's like, okay, this guy's been around so long now and has put so much into this, I can't help but respect this guy. And where Randy is just kind of the same guy floating around out there that he's been for years. And I don't dislike him, but I don't like it. He just really feels like when he's involved in a title program, it's just kind of like, well, we've run out of stuff to do, so let's bring Randy in for the month. And so, yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's some guys on the NXT roster that could be there tomorrow that would really
that would do something. So, but at that point, I mean, NXT, and we've talked about this before. I think Meltzer reported a few weeks ago that for the first time, maybe since the inception of the network, NXT is out of the top 10 most streamed things on WWE. So if you bring up Shinsuke, or Samoa Joe, at that point, I don't know, man. I mean, when guys like you and me are already like, we don't have to watch NXT every week. Okay. Yeah. Like that's their contingent. I mean, I think I think Liv Morgan has a ton of potential, but I'm not tuning in every week for her.
Right.
They got to do something at this point.
Right.
But speaking of NXT, do you feel, God, it's amazing how the WWE, how quickly they repeat history, because not even a year with Ellsworth, and it makes sense since some of that NXT creative is now behind the scenes at SmackDown in terms of like the head writer, but not even a year later, they're repeating, they're repeating the corner they painted themselves into with Blue Pants.
Right. Yeah.
Of taking someone that's massively over with the fans, that's not under contract, and putting them front and center. And, I think it's going to rub some of the talent backstage the wrong way if Ellsworth keeps getting flown out, week after week, and they keep him in prominent storylines. So I don't know. But that being said, I feel like they're just tossing it at the fans right now because they know, look, we've got Hell in a Cell coming up, and after that Survivor Series, which means there is no SmackDown dedicated pay-per-view till December.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't even remember which one that is.
I don't either.
I want to say it's like Roadblock.
Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. So that's the next time we're going to get a SmackDown only pay-per-view, and they got to keep people tuning in week after week. So they're going to toss everything out there that makes fans happy. And if Ellsworth makes fans happy, I was saying it last night to my wife. I was like, that t-shirt thing is significant. One, because he's getting merch. He's getting front and center merch. I don't remember the Blue Pants shirt ever promoted that heavily on NXT. But, I said to my wife last night, I was like, I bet you that they're going to look very closely at those t-shirt sales. And if they hit a certain threshold, we are going to see Ellsworth, just back front and center here, because that's going to signify to them that, this guy's over as a joke, perhaps, but a joke that people want to spend money on. And I think that's what matters to Vince McMahon more than anything.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
He doesn't care why you're spending the money. As long as you're spending the money, he wins.
Right.
Yeah. So as far as the match itself, I really liked it with Ambrose's interference. He repeated the joke, the car with the lights on thing. He did that. What was it in the build up to Money in the Bank? Every time he was on commentary or there. But I like that part of his character. And I think that him being the spoiler in this and being, sort of the thorn in the champ's side is so much better than what we saw with the belt on Ambrose. I didn't like Mean Dean. I didn't like the smug jerk Ambrose character that he was as champ. I like him more sort of as the guy who's just trying to drive you insane.
Right. Yeah. And that to me, that's when he's always been at his best, both during his WWE career and even previously. Like, that's what works to me the best about his persona. I do want to say that match again, for me, just speaks to what AJ is able to do, because they put him out there in a main event title match with James Ellsworth, and they actually had a match, and it wasn't a bad match. It was, and a lot of that is AJ, because he's able to elevate whatever he's doing, to being something more than it really should be on paper. So, yeah,
and frustrated AJ to me is, that's just gold to see him, get sort of worked up like that. And but again, it is sort of paint by numbers, and template, in the sense that, because they did this with Seth a lot too, right? This idea that Seth is going to be like, the sort of crapped upon champion. Yeah. And so I think, they're going their bag of tricks. I fully anticipate that soon we'll get, AJ Styles in a feud with Kane.
Right.
Same way. And they'll just sort of repeat with it. But I think it works. There are only so many beats that they can go back to week after week. But I thought it was really interesting, doing the win by DQ for Ellsworth. I don't know. Raj last week said I was crazy when I was like, is there a shot in hell that they actually put the belt on Ellsworth even for a night? And again, man, I think if those t-shirt sales are high enough, I could totally see them saying like, oh no, it's a good idea. And only because I think in WWE creative's mind, yes, it's a brand split. Yes, both brands are equal, yada, yada, yada. But because it's SmackDown. And I don't think they take SmackDown as seriously.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I can't see them putting the title on him in any significant way, but a one night fluke win that then gets overturned the next week, or
or the same night even have him open, have him give it back to Ambrose under that pretense. Going into something. But I thought the match was good. They really, you could tell that the beat they wanted to hit was with the kick, the no chin music joke. Right. They had that ramped up and ready to go. But what's funny to me about it is that both weeks in these, I think Ellsworth did a serviceable job. He definitely plays to the crowd. AJ was good, but it's funny to me when the star of these segments is Ambrose. And I think, again, this just speaks to his strengths. I don't know, I don't know if you watched the latest season of Swerved or even 12 Rounds 3 Lockdown, but Ambrose can act. I mean, he's like got legitimate chops.
Yeah, definitely.
And so for me, these matches were both just a showcase for what he can do as a performer. You know, even going beyond wrestling. Yeah. So you think Raw had the better show this week overall?
Well, I did. To me, I've been a wrestling fan for a long time, and I've been following WWE, WWF since 1985, 1986. But I watch a lot of other wrestling too. So I have things I like better about certain companies. But the one thing that WWF, regardless of any frustrations I've had with them over the year, the thing that they are just absolutely hands down the best at are kind of these big moment type deals. And the Goldberg return was a great example of that. Where the Raw show itself wasn't necessarily a great, memorable show to me. I mean, Raw rarely is these days. It's 3 hours, just way too long, even for someone that basically watches wrestling all day. But yeah, that Goldberg segment, I just thought it really couldn't have gotten any better from my perspective. I mean, and granted, I'm someone that watched, I watched Goldberg in the 90s. I was a big WCW fan. So for me, it was like this cool homecoming thing. But even still, he just seemed to really get over well with the crowd there. They don't really have WWE. They have a hard time. I mean, other than Cena, they don't really have these legit baby faces on the roster.
Yeah.
And when he was going out there hugging the kids and, doing his whole Goldberg shtick, it was really like, oh, this is kind of what they're missing. They need this kind of Superman guy that, can go out there and be this sort of, I know oftentimes WWE likes to hearken to the whole Shades of Grey thing, but at the end of the day, people do kind of want to see, I think, I mean, in the 90s, I think people got kind of crazy about wanting everyone to be kind of an unlikable character. But at the end of the day, people they want to see like a good guy out there versus that.
And they're very meta with it. I mean, having him talk about, his kid and the reason why he wants to come back and do this. I mean, this isn't like, oh, I'm just such an ass kicker. I have to come back and get one last match. Yeah. I mean, I think they're really making a good point of it. And and Bill Goldberg has been very vocal about, his frustrations with the business, why he wasn't in a rush to get back to the business. Yeah. And I like also, I mean, again, I think WWE has gotten a lot better. Maybe did the Daniel Bryan storyline being sort of the turning point with this, or even, the stuff that happened in CM Punk's last run. But in recognizing, the demand, recognizing what's going on and figuring out a way to incorporate that. And I have to say the video game 2K17, did a good job of that, because originally it was like, oh no, Goldberg's deal is only with the studio to promote the game. But then they saw the reaction it was getting and it built up very organically to this.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the payoff is good. Oh, that reminds me, speaking of CM Punk. So dude, last night on Talking Smack in Corbin's interview, and maybe this is the reason it was better, I urge everyone to watch this. If you did not watch Talking Smack last night, the Hype Bros were on. AJ Styles came out and like just flipped out, got mad at Daniel Bryan. It's on his head, yada, yada. But Baron Corbin was recycling CM Punk talking points about the fans and about, wanting him to sign something so they could put it on eBay because they don't have real jobs. I mean, it was like, it's like literally somebody just said, like, what was that thing CM Punk said? Let's just take some notes from there, give it to Corbin. It'll work. It's Talking Smack. Who cares? But yeah, dude, like totally just doing a lot of the same riff about, the fans, the company, the other wrestlers. Like, it was just like, whoa. I mean, like, but especially with the eBay thing and he literally said stopping them at the airport at 5 a.m. and they bought something they printed out off the internet that they want me to sign so they could put it on eBay because they don't have real jobs. Right. And it was just like, dude, like that's pretty word for word,
Yeah.
Kind of crazy.
That happens sometimes. It's funny when they'll just take something like that you don't think that they would recycle and make it their own.
Well, but it's something so esoteric and specific.
Oh yeah, no, that's definitely.
I mean, I would say if you had a drinking game, I mean, you could probably get alcohol poisoning if you were to take a drink every time somebody said, in commentary that a wrestler is trying to send a message or put someone on notice. Right. It's like there are very, very tried and true cliches
Yeah.
that come up again and again, but to have something so specific and so
Yeah.
was just very interesting. Speaking of which, that reminds me, have you played 2K17?
I have not yet, but from what I've seen, I'm actually kind of interested in it. I kind of taken a break from the WWE games the last few years, but I like the fact that it looks like they're incorporating promos into the game this year.
Well, that's
I haven't really seen the details on it, but yeah,
it's all text based. So you don't get even voiceovers for
Right.
your character or the other wrestlers, but it is very much that. So if you want to talk about the bag of recycled tropes that are used again and again in promos, I've played through probably about 10 hours of the game so far. I'm not sure how deep it goes, but I've seen so far there's maybe like 24 or 48 different things you can say in different configurations, and nothing surprising, sort of standard platitudes.
Yeah.
And there's no rhyme or reason, it seems to me, aside from whether it's a face or heel promo in terms of which way you're supposed to go with it. But one thing I'll say about the game, I think the graphics are great. I think the roster is great. The creator wrestler is very deep and involved. As I mentioned on our Raw podcast on Mondays, you can even choose how oiled up you want your guy to look.
Oh, that's
and
good.
yeah, but I have to say though, man, like, I've played a lot of games, and this one is one of the most broken, buggy at ship games that I've played. Not in terms of the play mechanic, like nothing weird, like you're doing a move and if you go in the corner, it gets frozen and you're screwed. But just weird stuff, like in the entrances, like the audience is holding signs and then they start to put them down and the signs just all disappear. Like they're not holding anything. Like your character disappears from the matchup screen half the time when you're going into something. I think it was a mistake for them to get it out in October this year because it feels so in need of a patch.
Right.
You can't even skip when you're, I'm still at the stage where I'm in an NXT tag team in the game, but you can't skip the intro. Like it shows you like a 15-second video package, truncated version of the NXT credits every time going in. It does a crowd shot every time. And you can't just skip past it and go right to what you're doing. It's just very unpolished, and it's interesting because the reviews aren't really talking about this. It's getting good reviews, I think, based on, everything that's under the that's included on what it could be, but not quite where it is. But if you go on the subreddit, the WWE game subreddit on there, I mean, it's just again and again people talking about how much it needs a patch. So I would say that you're not missing out anything immediately if you haven't bought it yet. I would say you're absolutely fine to wait for the sales as we head into post Thanksgiving and Cyber Monday. But that being said, I still recommend it for the fans. I mean, 2K16 wasn't perfect, but I probably put in a couple 100 hours on that.
Yeah, I mean that's usually tends to be the case with the WWE games. There's some bugginess, especially in the beginning, and they're never perfect, but there's usually enough there to sink your teeth into. Like with the whole promo aspect this year, like how you're describing it sounded pretty much how I figured it would be. Like it's not the most amazing feature yet, but once these things start to kind of trickle into the game, then over the years they get a little bit of tweaks here and there and become more substantive. So.
Yeah, but the lack of voiceover there. I mean, obviously there's the voiceover commentary in the game, and they have a lot more audience chants and different things this year. But, in last year's game, when Renee Young talked to you backstage, they at least had her voice, and this year it's just all text.
Yeah. And
I think with the graphics, I think the graphics are at a point right now where they're good, but there's sort of that uncanny valley where it veers into like sort of creepy good.
Yeah.
Like it's like this is real from some angles and like weird Dr. Moreau from other
definitely.
Angles.
And that's been the case with wrestling games for a while now, because I almost kind of miss, like, to me, the golden age for wrestling video games was sort of like the N64 era, WCW versus NWO Revenge and like the WrestleMania 2000 game. I loved those games, and they weren't. I mean, they wouldn't have been able to back then if they'd wanted to, but they weren't going for that kind of photorealistic realism or kind of a stylized look. And I almost think that sometimes suits wrestling games better than going into, as you described, the uncanny valley. So.
But what's cool about it, though, and I think this is polarizing this year, but as someone who downloads a lot of the created wrestlers to sort of fill out my roster and do more interesting things with it, they've made it so in all the matchup screens, everything in game is the 3D models. So that way your downloaded wrestlers match the main roster, not like last year where you would have the 3D guy and the photos of the main roster superstars. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, I mean, I feel like there are a couple reasons to buy this game. I mean, one is you want to go through, play as Goldberg as you can if you pre-ordered it, go through, just play some, matches, would do some interesting matchups. I'm looking forward to Hall of Fame mode last year they had a nice version of that. It's not unlocked yet in this game. That'll be forthcoming in the DLC, but I like when they sort of do that timeline of matches you can play through. But I think the real reason for a lot of us fans is we want to go in, make a wrestler that looks like a much more in shape version of ourselves and, have a good career run,
Right.
And with 2K16, I mean, I was able to do that. And I would say I probably got almost a full year. I mean, literally, so 11 months since it came out, 11 months worth of play value of just coming back to it again and again.
Oh, yeah.
So with 17, I mean, I'm not going to abandon it, but I definitely think, I'll probably wait for the patch once the new South Park game comes out or something else.
Right. What's the stability like these days with the downloading created wrestlers?
They improved that greatly over last year. Last year, you had to do it about 5 times to get it to stick.
Yeah.
And this year, it seems like it's working on the first try. Face import is okay if you have your photo like properly done. Right. Just in terms of like submitting it at the right dimensions and you crop it right. But yeah, it's the online aspects of it feel better, as far as that goes. And the created wrestlers is funny. They had only if you got the NXT bundle could you get Shinsuke at launch. And I have to say, the created wrestlers are so good that people are making now. And the fact that it looks seamless on that end, all you're really missing at that point is the official music for the time.
Right, exactly.
And man, I wish they let you import your own music into this.
Yeah, they used to. I know. But yeah.
You could do custom videos, but they have like stock footage. So you can like put together stuff based on the stock footage they provide. I mean, you can get pretty deep with it. I mean, for people that are more hardcore than I am, I mean, there's so much you could do with customizing the universe mode and making your own shows and your own arenas and your own titles. But yeah, for me, the creator wrestler part is, I mean, that's where the fun is. Doing that. And they're doing more of that. So they have it now where when you're friends with someone on Xbox Live or PS4, they can sort of invade your career storyline. So you can have them in there also. But they also have some sort of generic creator wrestler guys that start with you as like NXT guys. So there's like 3 other ones that you'll see in your matches. I thought that was interesting. I mean, they're not exciting characters. They're not cool. And I think, the bar for exciting stock fictional wrestlers in games is still Starman on Pro Wrestling on the NES. I mean, there's nothing quite on that level, but it's interesting. And so far I'm playing it. I'm about to win the tag titles with they paired me up with one of the other early NXT guys, and you can call people out in promos too to start feuds, which is kind of cool. You can pick a wrestler, but you don't say anything specific about them really.
Yeah.
Kind of weird. Cause I mean, that's the best thing about promos, right? Is guys like roasting each other.
Yeah.
So, I give it sort of a tepid recommendation, but I think that once it's patched, it's got a lot of potential.
Yeah.
Cool, man. So let's wrap things up for this episode. I want to thank everyone for stopping by once again and checking out the Wrestling Inc. podcast. Of course, we're here Monday nights immediately after Monday Night Raw with myself, Raj Giri, and Matt Morgan. And we'll be back next Monday with Matt and myself. Gino Vega, thanks for stopping by. Where can people find you online?
You can find me online at where can you find me online these days? WordPress.ginovega.com. You can also find me at Sensational Vega at Twitter.
Cool, man. Well, thanks for stopping by.
And I just want to say really quick, happy birthday shout out to the great Simon Gotch. I think his birthday was yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Since we're on the topic of SmackDown.
Of course, yes. Underused or not used.
Simon Gotch,
yeah. Although I don't know if you saw Main Event last week. They're back to doing the full intros for the Vaudevillains now.
Oh, that's good.
So that's something. But yeah, it's weird for them. I mean, they were over as faces, and now they're just back in the full sort of pseudo heel, but maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll get over. I think they're just such great performers, and I really hope this gimmick works out for them because I have no clue what to do with them otherwise.
Right.
Cool, man.
Well, Simon lives the gimmick, so
yeah, that's key, especially with that kind of facial hair.
Yeah.
Cool. So thanks everyone for checking it out. If you like it, subscribe on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube, leave us a comment or a rating. And until next time, I'm Glenn Rubenstein, and I'll see you back here on the Wrestling Inc. podcast. Take care.